we're going to continue our message of where we left off at on last week. Amen. This will have to be a part 2. Well, this is part 2 today, but we're going to have to go to part 3, part 4, because last night I got hung up into some things in the Word of the Lord. I was trying to get to bed, and you know, when you're in something, you can't leave it because that seed is forming. But we'll continue to talk about the Exodus, a passage to liberation, and this is part 2. And we are understanding certain things as we are dealing with this area of theology. We now are forced to wrestle with some areas and issues, some things that we must speak to. We're glad to see Sister Elizabeth Sabeko here with us, amen, this morning. Stand, Sister Elizabeth, amen. Amen. Our prayers are with her, amen, as she's continued to fight for the freedom and liberation of her people there in South Africa. A miracle. If how many of you saw the telecast when we were sharing, amen, in that interview. But one thing we must understand is that the church has a responsibility to liberate oppressed people. If the church does not speak to this issue or speak to this area, then the church is not the church. The church must be the voice for those who have no one. Say with me, the church must be the voice, for those who has no one. Now, as we begin to understand this, we must understand liberation, number 1, must be proclaimed. Number 2, the good news must be shared worldwide. And number 3, we must become the visible manifestation of liberation. Touch your neighbor and say, we must become the visible manifestation of liberation. Begin reading Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. Begin reading.
Therefore, they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in bricks, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor.
Okay, hold it right there. Now, as we begin to deal with the Exodus, a passage for liberation, we must oftentimes say in every service, because we know faith don't come by having heard, but faith comes by continually hearing. And so therefore we must also say that we are not preaching a message of racism, not a message that just speaks to one particular race, but a message that speaks worldwide. As we also shared with our care group leaders this morning, that if a person says, well, if I am white, and if I bring my children to your church, how could they fit in? Going through rites of passages, sitting under the teaching of you teaching concerning the black experience. Now, they may not become a better American, but they'll become a better human being. Let me say that again. They will become a better human being. Why would you say that? Well, 5 days during the week while they go to school, Monday through Friday, they're learning concerning Euro-American history. They're learning all about their culture. A matter of fact, taking others and assimilating them into their culture and saying that if you're not like us, you're inferior. But what they'll begin to learn is that there is a difference, but your difference don't make you inferior. You'll begin to say, I respect the fact that you are African American. I respect the fact that you're Asian American. I respect the fact that you're Jewish American or whatever your descent is. I will respect your difference, but yet I will not oppress because I want to be sensitive. Now, I must say this, that it is important that we preach this gospel. You may say, why? Because I do not believe that white men purposely get out of their bed in the morning and say, I want to oppress black people. Okay. I do not believe that we are in a system, amen, that, people just get up purposely and say, now in some agencies that do happen, but we won't go that way today. But as a rule of thumb, as people, as human beings, there's many people, if you ask them were they racist, they will tell you no. And you would have to believe them in the sense of what they believe racism is in their own heart. But many of them are insensitive. Amen. Many of them don't even realize how they begin to look at blacks in a condescending way, how they really do not view many of them as being human beings or worth anything. So therefore, it forces now the church to begin to share light on this area. Amen. And so therefore, we must have a black theology. Amen. Because we've been sitting under the teachings of white theologians, and we've had a white theology that has pretty much, through Calvinism and others have taught pretty much, election, and pretty much that whites were elected to rule and blacks were elected to serve. We see that also through this, many, unfortunately, in the church, white church believe that black folks have been cursed and say that the curse of Ham is on. How many of you have heard that? Amen. Just so I know that I'm speaking to the right audience here. And so they've been taught that, well, blacks are cursed because of Ham. Well, God never cursed Ham. He cursed Canaan. God never cursed all black folks. Amen. So therefore, we begin to look at this area. And then we are still brainwashed because we've got to understand that Noah did not have 3 children that looked differently. All of them were the same shade. All of them were the same color. Shem, Japheth, and Ham. Amen. We must also agree that Shem and Ham look the same because Moses grew up in Egypt, and Egypt is Africa. So he had to look like the Egyptians. I'm sorry, Charleston Heston does not fit the role of Moses. Amen. I know what the images have been. They've been in your mind, but I'm sorry, he does not qualify for the role. Amen. Liz Taylor does not qualify to be Cleopatra. Amen. Not want to take anything away, but if we're going to communicate history, we need to communicate it in truth. So we have been reared up in a system that has been teaching us things, lies and deception, and therefore has enslaved people, people that have stolen your history, removed your legacy, amen, and if it was possible, amen, that they could change some of the Egyptian art, they would, amen. But you were a people, African, that had pyramids when other nations could not build pyramids. It amazes me that you seemingly, amen, were writers. You invented writing or skills of communication, amen. You were engineers, you were designers, amen. You had ability in areas, so don't let anyone tell you at all that you are inferior, because you too are in the image of God and in the likeness of God, amen. So we are forced to begin to deal with some areas concerning enslavement, the coming out of an enslaved people and entrapped people. So this message is not for one group of people. This message is for the oppressed as well as the oppressor. And hoping that the oppressor, in hearing this message, says, I've heard a man that has brought truth to my eyes, that I did not realize how insensitive I was to a need in community, a need in our nation. I believed what television said. I thought all black folks were on welfare, but I met some that were not. I went to some books and looked at some statistics, and I also found that there's more whites on welfare than blacks, and I don't understand why this was not communicated to me. I had to also ask myself the question that when I went down to the justice system and the court system, I knew that the prisons was filled and overpopulated, amen, with black people. And why is it that they wanted to build more prisons, but they didn't want to create more jobs? There seems to be a conspiracy. So we're hoping that this message will begin to touch the lives for many adults.